Is it okay to replace your lead singer? I thought this might be kind of an interesting topic because Linkin Park recently announced, and there's video out, that they found a new singer for their band, Emily Armstrong from the band Dead Sarah. I'll just tell you right up front, I was never a Dead Sarah fan or an Emily Armstrong fan. I don't remember if it was with Midline or with Cure for the Fall, but one of those bands, we opened up for Dead Sarah a couple times when they first were coming to town. It was a little strange because the radio station was just all guffaw over them and just making a big deal like they were the hottest thing that ever happened. And Mary says Cure for the Fall. Okay, so that again, I don't remember things in the. Anthony says Midline, so maybe we opened up for him with Cure for the Fall and with Midline. That would make sense. That's probably the case. Sometimes you see things happening backstage that ruins your perspective of a band. And that's what happened when we saw what was going on backstage with that band. And it was very disappointing. Why was it disappointing? To me, it was like they had everything going for them, or at least appeared to be, and then outside influences appear to be possibly sabotage their career. Whereas the bands that I'm in, we try to do everything that we can to be successful and to get opportunities and to be thankful for what we have and to be ready to play and those kind of things, and to witness a band kind of throwing that away to a certain degree, and watching radio and people like that and press just throw themselves all over how great this band is. I was like, come on, man. This is ridiculous. So that kind of probably ruined my experience with that band. Well, now Emily Armstrong from Dead Sarah is now the new singer for Linkin Park. I think that she's doing a really good job at that. I personally am not a big fan of listening to a girl scream that hard, that long, that often. I like girls because girls are feminine. Not because girls are trying to scream gutturally like some dude. I want to try to keep up with these comments as we go, because I think this could be a good subject, but also a touchy subject. Mark says, changing any member of the band is okay, but it can and usually will affect the sound. Anthony says, I definitely remember backstage. Yeah. So there's stuff that happens backstage sometimes when you are opening up for these bands that you're just like, come on. Are you kidding me? Seriously? I've been working my butt off all the time to have these opportunities, and for somebody that actually has the opportunity is sabotaging their own career. I'm just like, get on the sidelines and get out of the way of the bands that actually do give a rip. So anyway, Linkin Park, I saw some short videos and I thought that she was doing an acceptable job. But of course, there was a lot of Linkin Park fans who claim to be bailing on the band because how dare they, Chester Bennington is not replaceable, or that, things like that. And I understand. Now, he passed away, as did Chris Cornell. I don't think that I could get on board with Soundgarden with a different singer. At least I don't think so. However, Alice in Chains seemed to pull it off. They pulled it off in a really great way, to where William Duvall is not trying to be Lane Staley. William Duvall is being William. And he has a voice that works really well with with Alice in Chains, and he has his own personality, his own thing that he brings to the table that isn't trying to overshadow anything that Lane Staley did. So I think for Alice in Chains, it really worked out well. And, you know, being laid up, I have plenty of time to watch YouTube. So I kind of got into an Alice in Chains kick for a couple days, watching new and old Alice in Chains stuff and interviews. Mark says Stone Temple Pilots is also doing a good job. Yes, they are. And I don't know who the name of their new singer is, but yeah, they're doing well. And I think some bands that are out there, especially as they have been around longer, the audience, the fans, just want to hear those songs. They just want to hear those songs. They want to hear them performed really well. Foreigner, for example, nobody in Foreigner is an original member. Mick Jones appears like for special occasions, but other than that, nobody in that band is original. But I think that was a slow drift into that. It was like slow. It wasn't like all of Foreigner suddenly left and here's a bunch of replacement guys. And Foreigner's done very, very well. I thought I saw that Foreigner released a new song, but I haven't heard it. I don't know anything about it. I think that I saw that was mentioned. Van Halen replaced David Lee Roth with Sammy Hagar. That was something that worked out really well for Van Halen, although I know that there seems to be two different worlds. You're either a David Lee Roth fan or you're a Sammy Hagar fan. Motley Crue in the early 90s replaced Vince Neil with John Corabi, and that album was not well received to the general public. And it seems like not until they released the movie The Dirt that people started to appreciate that Motley Crue album. I think it was in 1991. Maybe it was 92. Incidentally, that album, the Motley Crue album with John Corabi, is my favorite Motley Crue album. I think that's the better songs. I think that's the better recordings. It resonated more with me than the Vince Neil songs. Not to discredit anything with Vince Neil, but yeah, I really, really appreciated that record. Good morning, Kirby. What band do you think is better with their new singer? Aha. Well, let's see. I'm not. I don't know of every band out there that has their new singer. Van Halen did very, very well with Sammy Hagar. Now, you know, I only know the inner workings of the bands that I'm in, but I'm sure that those bands like Van Halen and Motley Crue have similar discussions in their circles, and you know, people get bent out of shape with other people for whatever reason, personality, money, you name it. There's a lot of So to try to answer Mark's question, I think that I really like Alice in Chains with William Duvall singing, and I don't look at that as in competition with their back catalog with Lane Staley. It's just a new version. But I was thinking more along the lines of, you know, what people's perception is when a lead singer is replaced. You know, I think when you hear a band and you fall in love with a band, especially when a band is new, maybe, I don't know, maybe the audience I'm speaking to right now is probably closer, we're probably all closer in age. So we grew up, you know, hearing a new single from a band on the radio or discovering them in some kind of music magazine and then going to a store and buying their record. And it was a full body of work. And we really became vested in that band, and we kind of grew with the band. I think it's different for new bands now because they're releasing singles. And so you're getting little chunks of a body of work, even if you want to call it that. Good morning, Greg. And So I think some of growing with the band is lost on the new audiences. So, for example, for me, with Pearl Jam, when I first heard Pearl Jam, I thought Pearl Jam was the greatest thing that ever happened on the planet. It was so great. Their music was so great. And I wasn't much of a Nirvana fan, but I was definitely a Pearl Jam fan. And I loved that first record. And and I was always the person that was interested in who the people in the band were. So I learned all their names, and then you kind of see their personality in each band member. And then when their second record came out, I thought that record was awesome too. But then after their second album, I feel like the edginess of the band completely went away. And then they no longer had Dave Aberzee playing drums either. And that, I don't know if that really bothered me. It was just the music as a whole. So I kind of lost interest in Pearl Jam after the second record. But, you know, through all of that, falling in love with Soundgarden, and then really, really sinking my teeth into Alice in Chains. That was the best. I still could not get on board with Nirvana. Love the Foo Fighters, but not Nirvana so much. Not that I hate Nirvana, I just didn't get it like everybody else did. But could you imagine like falling in love with a band and being a fan of the band for so long, and then something happens to Eddie Vedder, and then Pearl Jam says, oh, we're going to replace Eddie Vedder? Eddie Vedder is kind of the face and voice of that band, of that brand. That's their whole thing. And so I think that if something were to happen to Eddie Vedder, that Pearl Jam would probably be over, which I'm assuming that Soundgarden is over. There's no replacing Chris Cornell, I don't think. Going back to Linkin Park, there was some, I would say more often than not, the comments about Emily Armstrong being in the band were super negative versus anybody that was on board with it. Mary says, Michael Hutchence from INXS. Yes. So when Michael Hutchence from INXS died, we all thought, well, the band will probably die along with it, right? Another super strong personality that was the face and voice of this brand, of this band. Well, then there was a TV show called Rockstar INXS. Rockstar INXS, where they had, 20 or 30 people that auditioned, if you will, to become the new lead singer of INXS. And then every time they eliminated somebody, they would say, I'm sorry, you're not right for our band, INXS. So Rockstar INXS got whittled down to a gentleman by the name of J.D. Fortune, who really, really wanted that lead singer spot. And I thought he was great. He was... One thing that bothered me, though, during the show is how arrogant he started to become as they got closer and closer to the end. And I didn't like that so much. Well, that eventually imploded on INXS. I think just that guy's personality got out of control or whatever, and boom, he's gone. So where's INXS? I don't know. Then, of course, TV tried to keep the fire burning by having Rockstar Supernova, which was Tommy Lee, Jason Newsted, and Dave Navarro on guitar. And they tried to find a singer to put like this super group together called Supernova. I thought that show was pretty cheesy. And to be honest, I mostly watched it because I'm a big Dave Navarro fan. I think he's an incredible guitar player. And I wanted to see Jason Newsted as well. Kelly, I've seen 50-50 on socials regarding Lincoln, with it being 7 years ago. I'm not mad at all. In fact, I'm really digging their new song. Yeah, So Kelly, thank you for that. I think when a band who has, and did you say 7 years? I think you did. 7 years. Wow. See, time goes so fast. I can't keep track of what the heck's going on. It feels like that was a year ago. But yeah, 7 years, and I think that Emily Armstrong is going to do a good job being in that. But I think to the general public, some of those fans probably feel robbed and like they're doing a disservice. I saw comments being like, "Oh, this is just a money grab." Obviously, from people who have no idea how the music business works, no idea, or how business works, for that matter. But let's suck this down more to a local level of replacing singers. Like what defines being a really great singer? How do you describe a really great singer? Other than the obvious words in my question, really great. What's the first thing that pops out at you when you see a band? Typically, drummers excluded, because drummers seem to zero in on drummers. But a lot of times, the first thing that people are going to pay attention to is the singer, because they're fronting the band, right? They're fronting the band. They're what's representing that band. Is now, how well do they sing? Are they singing great? Sometimes you can be an okay singer, but your stage presence is just so good that you can't help but be interested in the band. Mark says, for me, the tone and timbre are the difference makers. Yeah. I think sometimes a singer can sing, to Mark's point, I think sometimes singers can sing well, but there's a tone or a timbre to their voice that's off-putting. It's hard to put your finger on. Yeah, it's possible to be like, something can be in tune, but like the intonation or something's wrong with what you're hearing. So is there some kind of quality to their voice? Is there something unique about what they do that makes them great? I think there's probably a lot of really great karaoke singers out there. You know, your average everyday person who goes and hangs out at the bar and grabs the microphone and sings along and does pretty well at that. Should they be fronting a band? I don't know. If you are in a band and you're singing, your job is to sing. You should be able to sing in key, on pitch. You should know the lyrics to the songs. This is where these are my opinions, okay? So if you're a lead singer out there and your nose goes crooked out of what I'm saying, I'm sorry. Are they dressed for the part? Do they look like they belong on stage? You know, are they part of a picture? You know, I've said multiple times I'm not a fan of people wearing shorts and flip-flops and things like that on stage. Imagine Kiss. You got Gene Simmons and Peter Criss and Ace Frehley, and then you got Paul Stanley, and say everybody's in makeup except for Paul. It wouldn't make sense, right? He's not looking like he's part of the band. So I would say make sure you look like a cohesive unit when you're performing. Is the singer engaged with the crowd, or are they engrossed in their iPad? I see that all the time too. Okay, so let's say they can't sing very well and they're engrossed in an iPad. Replace that singer. Replace that person. Have some self-worth in your ability as a musician or a singer to put your best foot forward. Memorize the lyrics. Not just memorize them, but engross yourself in those, immerse is the word I'm looking for. Immerse yourself in those lyrics, so that you know them internally. I always tell my students, don't practice until you get it right. Practice until you can't get it wrong. There's no way that you're going to fail at this because you know it that well. What's the singer's stage presence? What's their personality? Are they magnetic? Do they have a lot of charisma in what they do as a singer? Roddy says internalize. Yes, exactly. Thank you. That's the word I wanted. I was like engross, immerse. There was something else. So Roddy, thank you for bailing me out. Internalize those music. It doesn't matter if it's original material or if it's cover material. If it's original material, man, if it's something you wrote, don't let something so personal don't leave those things to chance. Some people can have an okay voice, but their stage presence is just so overwhelming that makes up for that. And then also, there's an internal working to a band when they're performing, is like, how well is this band not only interacting together on stage, but also interacting with the audience? So that's something like with Midline that we've always had. We've always had a really great relationship behind the scenes, always a really great relationship on stage where we're interacting with each other, and then we're also interacting with the crowd. And the audience recognizes that, where, different members of the band are having these moments, these incredibly great moments on stage, and they're seeing that. And then not only can those band members be having a really great moment on stage together, but the audience feels like they're part of that moment. And I think that's really special, whether you recognize it or subconsciously recognize what's happening. So, yeah, I think having a really engaging singer who can sing really well, who looks the part, who's, like I said, this is not an iPad. This is a drum pad. But when you see this on stage, let's see, and they're reading lyrics, and they're so into their iPad that it reminds me of being a little kid and having a book read to you. And that person reading the book, you'd have library time when you're in elementary school, and you would go and listen to somebody read, because we couldn't read ourselves very well yet. But I'm reading this really great story about 3 little bears, and I'm really like this because I don't know it very well in order to present this story in a good way to where people really, it's just like, good grief. I know I'm on my soapbox. I'm comfortable on my soapbox. For me as a drummer, I don't want to embarrass myself when I play. There's enough things that can go wrong being well rehearsed as it is, okay? You can have sticks slip out of your hands. You can have, I call it stroking out, where you could be playing along and suddenly stumble over a beat, and you can have moments where you just completely forget what you're supposed to do. All that being said, I try to be as prepared as I possibly can be to really know the songs, and like Roddy said, like, to internalize those songs. So, the better prepared you are, the more internalized everything is, the margin of error gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. How much bad singing are you willing to be okay with? Some people are out there singing in bands and they have no self-awareness that they can't sing very well. Okay, why is that? Do you record yourself? Do you record your rehearsals and listen back and go, oh, if I really like that. Like, first of all, you got to get out of your own way. Okay. So if you're new to being in bands and recording yourself, because I remember this back in junior high and high school when I'd try to put a band together, and you would record yourself on like a little cassette, and we would wrap a towel around the cassette player because it would help from the sound distorting that little tiny microphone that's on your boombox. It was cool to listen back and kind of dig on yourself a little bit, like, oh, that's us being recorded. But then you have to go back and listen with critical ears and say, is this good or is this bad? What is happening that's good? What's happening that's bad? And how can we improve on these things? So I highly recommend people recording rehearsals. If we have this technology in our pocket constantly. It's so easy to do. There's all these phones have these recording features. You can just hit record and or better yet, video yourself and with audio and watch and listen and say, is that good or bad? Where does this need to be improved? Like I said, for me personally, when I'm on stage, I don't want to embarrass myself, and I definitely don't want to embarrass the other people I'm on stage with by not being prepared. So I'm drifting a little bit away from, is it okay to replace your singer? But, however, I think it's everybody's responsibility in the band to be really good at what they do, but the singer seems to be the first thing that people are going to be cluing in on. Neil Peart said that his goal was to create the perfect drum part, then try to be as close to perfection with every performance. Yeah, for sure. And those guys in Rush definitely being perfectionists and holding themselves to a high standard. I think that's important. That's important. My buddy Jared Anthony says, in a rock and roll performance, the best singers display the whole package. Yes, they do. That's what I was saying earlier, Jared, is like, can they sing great? Are they engaging with the audience? Do they look the part? Are they engaging with the band? And then also, are they engaging with the audience? And then Jared also says, of course, you should have the ability to sing, but you have to convey the emotion to the people. You should be compelling enough that the fans find it difficult to take their eyes off of you. Of course, your guitar player feels differently. Own that stage, baby. All 100% true, Jared. Yes. And the producer agrees with that as well. Yeah. Yeah, and going back to James, like Neil wanting to create the perfect drum part and then recreate that perfect drum part each time. Yes, that was definitely a thing with Rush. I would say, though, as far as singers go, if I hear a band on the radio or I discover a band somehow and you're hearing their recorded work and you go, wow, this is great. And then you go see them play live and the singer is squeaking and squawking through the whole thing. You're like, what's happening here? So in the world of recording, you can fix so much stuff, pitch correction and then you can move the phrasing around. Sometimes just because you can doesn't mean you should, Marcy says. Yes, exactly. Sometimes people are permanent members of a band and then something happens and they get sick or I see this happen more with cover bands where they need a fill-in singer. So if you have a sub singer that's playing, I think typically speaking that's okay. Depending on how popular your band is, you might be really considering like, okay, I need a sub for this show. Are they going to still protect the brand of the band? James says, I don't have a problem with replacing any singer, but everyone has their own opinion to their acceptance level. Yep. Herbie says Corey Feldman is delusional. Yeah, watching interviews with him, Kirby, I agree. Mary says, I think it depends on the band. Could Wham have replaced George Michael? He went on to a solo career. The band ended, but it totally worked for Van Halen. Foreigner is pretty much a cover band. Yep. And John Faulkner is here. What's up, John? Yep. So just like James says, everybody's going to have their opinion on what the acceptance level is on replacing a singer. I'm a bigger fan of the Sammy Hagar version of Van Halen than I am of the David Lee Roth version. I felt, this is not to discredit David Lee Roth, but David Lee Roth is more like a Vegas showgirl to me. or something that's just a little too flamboyant for my taste. But when Sammy Hagar came along, I felt like there was, I don't know if maturity is the right word to say, but I'm going to use that word. It felt like there was a more mature approach to the band. I felt like the songs were better. I don't know. It resonated with me more than David Lee Roth. However, as I got older, my appreciation for the David Lee Roth era is way better than it was when it was happening, if that makes sense.